Hello.
Hi, everybody.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Environmental Podcast.
Yeah, this is our podcast where we investigate different aspects of sustainability. Mhm.
Yes, it is. And this month we've been deep diving into the topic of fossil fuels.
And
Um,
wow,
Goodness gracious.
it's a lot.
Um, yeah, it is a lot. And so we actually decided to do this episode a little bit differently because we read a book last week in which it brought up a lot of I guess differing opinions and different points that we just really wanted to investigate things further.
Yeah, yes. And actually, a book or a podcast that I found that was super interesting that really talked about why that book had the points that it did. It was called The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels. It's by Alex Epstein. The book, that's the book. The
Mhm.
podcast I listened to that talked about the book, um, it was called Drilled. And it doesn't talk about this book in general, but it in specific, but it does talk about how the fossil fuel industry communicates and why they communicate that way, and the the passage of time between the 70s when climate change became like pretty well discussed in the scientific community and now. And I'm telling you, this is the first season of Drilled. If you listen to it, it's by Critical Frequency, and you can go to criticalfrequency.org/drilled to listen to it.
Oh.
The first season is like mind blowing because you're like, oh, everything from the moral case of fossil fuels is here, and this is why. They talk about like why they talk about energy being in fossil fuels being the driver of all human progress.
Mhm.
That is the center point of that book. And that
Funny.
was a very, very highly curated message that started in the 80s that was so purposeful to create climate denial because in the 80s the fossil fuel companies learned that policy around carbon emission would fuck over their bottom line.
Right.
And before that, they were energy companies. They weren't focused only on fossil fuels. They were focused on wind and solar and nuclear energy also. And they were bringing in a lot of, Exxon in particular, was bringing in a lot of scientists to do climate change research. And then they basically learned about this and learned that policy would make them a lot less money and fired all of their scientists and like basically brought in new scientists and created a whole new marketing strategy for uh to create climate denial. And it goes deep, and they have spent millions, and they have like figured out how to infiltrate the private parties and country clubs and political systems. It actually goes
Mhm.
so deep, and Drilled does a very, very good job of breaking it open.
Nice.
And one of my favorite things about this book is that they identified the audience, or
The
sorry, about the podcast.
podcast. Yeah.
Sorry, about the podcast, is that they pulled a memo from Exxon that identifies the audience, and they for this, and it's older, less educated white males from large households who are not active information seekers and not likely to be green consumers. End quote. That is that's literally in the marketing memo. Like,
Oh boy. Yes.
so it's loaded. Go listen to it if you're interested. It is an incredible podcast. Yeah.
That is awesome. I mean, what's so funny is that when before you started listening to that, or when we were reading the book, we were having conversations of like, this book feels like fucking propaganda. Like,
Yes.
and that's because it was.
It was active, like, it
Yeah.
was active propaganda that they started doing, like, basically when we were born. So we have never lived, we're 30 and you're 31, you're 32?
Yeah.
31,
I just turned
32.
32.
Yes, you had a birthday. Yeah, we've never lived in an era where fossil fuel companies have a different message or are sharing something else, but it existed.
Yeah.
That was a real thing. That was a very clear switch for them.
Fascinating.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
Super
Well,
that.
really, really rad. Yeah. So definitely check that out. Yeah. But on today's episode, we are going to be kind of talking about the different research that Ob and I both did. We kind of both had a little list of questions and we set off on the internet to do some individual research. And
We
so
read the whole internet.
we read it. And yeah, so we're going to kind of just be debriefing each other on that and you in the process.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Are we ready to jump into that?
I'm nervous. Yeah.
It's a lot, but it should be. This
Yeah.
is crazy. Yeah. And we knew, yeah, that this topic was going to be so huge, which is why we kind of, did it a little bit differently. We're not going to be talking to anybody from the fossil fuel industry this month, but
I'm
but
not sorry.
I feel like we did actually by listening to that book last week.
Yeah.
That the
Yeah, I feel weird about that, but our chats are for change makers and the fossil
yeah,
fuel industry is not
they're actively on that.
on that.
Yeah, so the pieces that I looked into were like, yeah, better understanding kind of the historical, environmental, but also geopolitical injustices of the fossil fuel industry in the world. um I wanted to understand what the currently accepted research on climate change was,
Mhm.
um just to kind of get that clear. And then I also wanted to look into some of the issues around the like rare minerals involved that are necessary for renewable energy. So those are kind of varying topics, but I'll bust into those. Um and I think the most interesting thing, I guess, really if you start to do any actual research into the history of the fossil fuel industry, it's pretty much dirty from top to bottom since like day one.
Yep.
Like, eh, yeah, I
But
honestly
why?
think,
Why? What did it
I mean,
I mean,
I,
that's such a loaded question, but like
yeah, because from the very beginning, I mean, it's always been such a profitable thing. And with money comes power, and with power comes the desire to secure that power for longer.
Mhm.
And they the fossil fuel industry, I mean, it's not just like oil and gas like this. It goes into plastics, it goes into so many, it goes into pretty much every single area of our life. Like, I don't think there's really not a whole lot of like items that exist around us that don't have some sort of like mm, basis in
Right.
in like fossil fuels or plastics. So
Right. Your plants. Your
it's,
plant.
yeah, that's about it. Maybe terracotta. I don't know. Not a whole lot. I've got some peacock feathers over here that are probably organic, but um yeah, it's really just power, and it's like they've just infused themselves into every aspect of like how countries operate, and have really solidified themselves there. it just sort of, yeah, I mean, they have no incentive to not be shady and to not like
Mhm.
really do everything in their power to continue things as they are, you know?
Mhm.
Um, and this is, this it really has been from the very beginning. They pretty much in every country that has some sort of oil production, the U.S. government and certainly politicians who are funded by the fossil fuel industry have been involved in coups, just overthrowing
Yep.
the government. And it's typically any left wing leader. The US backs coups in those areas to put in right wing leaders or military leaders, authoritarian regimes of some sort, um,
Mhm.
to keep things unstable. They make money with the sales of weapons. They make money with the sales with war.
Mhm.
They have, and as fucked up as it is, it's the truth. Um,
Yeah.
so, if back
They fund
basically
wars.
basically throughout the 50s, 60s, and 70s, they were highly involved with overthrowing governments in the Middle East and in throughout South America. Um, yeah, any leader who was like friendly with unions, left wing in some way, um, was overthrown. And the people that they put in power were often fucking terrible and were just committing human rights violations left and right. Like yeah. I think that the shorter list would be instances where the fossil fuel industry actually did something positive for the world. I think that list would be easier to condense than the list of atrocities.
Oh man.
um because I don't mean to laugh, I don't, but it's just like insane that it's just, and it
Yeah.
continues to happen. Yeah.
I mean, did you just like Google fucked up shit that the fossil fuel industry
I I was
did?
kind of like, yeah, how was the fossil fuel industry involved in politics? Like how, has the fossil fuel industry been involved in um and then diving into areas in the Middle East and
Mhm.
like, yeah, learning about the Iranian coup in the 50s. That's kind of where that started. It was democratically elected prime minister. People liked him, overthrew him. That kind of, and it's sort of, that was the catalyst for a lot of instability there.
Mhm.
And I also knew that was something that had happened historically in almost every South American country. Um, it's pretty much anywhere that has some sort of an oil refinery. There has been some way where the fossil fuel industry has worked to control the people who are in power in that area, be it the actual government, the um, militias,
Mhm.
um, or the police.
Yep.
Um, these people are around the people in power around where refineries are get paid off by
Yep.
the oil industry to just, keep their interests.
Yeah. And there's that other podcast that we were talking about before, The Crisis. That's what that's about. It's happening right now
Yeah.
in Colombia.
Yeah.
That's what it's about. Totally.
So yeah, it's definitely something that's actively still happening. I mean, within the US, it's like, yeah, they haven't necessarily been involved in like a coup, but certainly,
Maybe.
but quite possibly, yeah.
What?
I mean, right. Someday we'll find out who paid the January 6th Capitol.
Yeah.
But I mean, but just even at a basic level, areas around refineries are highly toxic, and those in the States, just, anyone living within an area close to those refineries has a much higher chance of experiencing asthma or other lung
Yep.
conditions that are, tied to air quality issues.
Yep.
And those are typically areas that are low income, have higher populations of people of color. This is definitely a disproportionate issue in terms of race.
Yep.
White, folks with money don't have to live within those conditions. Even if somebody built a refinery, close to where they were living, they have the ability to leave, right? Which has
Right. They could
happened,
just move.
yeah, just move. It's no problem. But for those communities that are lower income, they can't, they don't have that luxury, so they're stuck with it. And
Hmm. Yeah, or
that,
it's their job, or
right,
yeah.
right. And interestingly, I think within the past year, I think it was last year, I think the specific article I was looking at was from the LA Times, was about how it was investigating kind of different organizations that were funding police in the US.
Okay.
And they found that oil industries were one of the, or oil companies, I keep using the term oil industries, oil companies were commonly the biggest funders of police forces in the States, um,
Yeah.
which is just an interesting thing. I mean, it's
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, is that we talked about it a little bit before, but then it leads so easily into politics. Police
mhm,
funding is political. Like, it's jurisdiction based, and it is based on your commissioner, which is an elected position. Like, you know,
yeah,
you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours.
there's
Um,
so much
is
of
a
that
huge
here.
part of police culture, and I'm not saying that from a conspiracy standpoint. I'm saying that from seeing it firsthand.
Yeah,
Which, yeah, that's real. So
it
I'm not
absolutely
surprised by
is.
that.
It's not surprising. It's not surprising, but it's just like, it's wild, to think of like the oil companies have been involved with like really creating just massive instability in other countries, and to think that they don't have interest in doing that here too is really naive. And so I'm not going to say, like, I don't have any particular like claims to make about that, but like,
That's a good one.
but once again, they profit from instability in areas, right? Like
Yeah, they
when there's
do.
crises, where do people go first? Like people go buy a shit ton of gas so they can, like, make sure their car is good, have generators running, like anytime that there's a really any instability, people like hunker down. And
Yeah, they make sure they have energy.
yeah, energy, exactly. So yeah, and yeah, so that was really, really fascinating and it was just kind of like, yeah, re-solidified that they have no interest in not operating in this way. And how can we ever believe that they would do anything other than this, you
Right,
know? So
right.
it's interesting, and it's just sort of like, we need to continue to be aware of that as we move forward, and as other energy companies may grow and take, and shift in their power, as we maybe shift to more renewable resources. Like, the companies that control those still have a lot of control, and they still have like, there's still a lot of potential for them to do similar things.
Mhm.
And it's just something that, like, yeah, history's gonna repeat itself, I suppose, if we continue to like allow these large corporations that hold a finite resource, if we continue to not hold them accountable
Mhm.
for, kind of how they're operating and how they're um, exploiting workers. And yeah, yeah, it's just is
Yeah.
it kind of an interesting backstory, I think, um, to some of the other things I was looking at, which is like, okay, understanding now what's happening with climate change, understanding what potential issues there are within renewables, because that was a big thing that in the book we read last week, Alex Epstein made a big point to talk about the issues within renewable resources,
Yep.
and particularly like mining for the specific elements that we need to have
Mhm.
batteries and solar panels and stuff like that. So, yeah, that was also very interesting. Yeah. I suppose, right. So, okay. So I have that one, or the kind of accepted climate change science.
I would like to know.
Oh.
I think I'm interested in knowing about like transitioning into the
Yeah.
renewables and then into climate change
Yeah.
and then like a quick climate change overview because I feel like like the accepted climate change knowledge is something that is out there.
It is. It is. And I guess I just wanted to like see like if there was new science coming out, or like what it
Mhm.
was, what accepted evidence we were relying on. And
Yeah.
or like, and yeah, so there are definitely some pretty specific consensus points that like now actually 100% of climate scientists agree upon. So hey, that's progress. That was
Whoa.
different. Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, we'll get there. Okay. So, yeah. So this whole industry of mining is freaking crazy. I mean, so these minerals are called rare earth elements, or REE.
Okay.
That's what they're that's what the term for, like, I think it's 16 or 17 individual r- elements that are necessary for creating um, different aspects of, yeah, they're within the production of solar and wind power. Lithium is one that's necessary for batteries.
Right.
Gallium is another one that's necessary for photodetectors and solar panels. Those are like the leading two.
Okay.
And essentially, I mean, mining of these is not only an ecological kind of disaster because the process of mining for these resources definitely affects the surrounding areas. The
Mhm.
soil and water get highly polluted. Um, they're the chemicals that are used to extract these elements are corrosive to bones and teeth. Uh, and it's almost almost all of the mining of these elements happens in China. Um, and there are
Does
six,
it does
yeah,
it only happen in China because that's where it exists, or does it only happen with China because of regulations?
kind of both. So there
Okay.
are some mines in Australia of lithium. I also think that there are mines in within Mexico for lithium, but there's issues with there's like internal issues that's not being exported right now. I don't have all the history on that, but um, they mostly exist in China. China's just
Okay.
huge.
Yeah.
And like
Yeah.
there are some in Europe, and there was like an organization that got together called Your Rare EU Rare Project, which was a like they it was an organization that started around how they can kind of locate those rare earth deposits and safe mines and how they can be safely extracted throughout Europe. So that was done
Okay.
and that completed in 2017. So they know where all of the, well, I don't know, I can't say all, but they know where like these mines can be within Europe,
Okay.
but it's not a lot. And 80% of what we in the US import of these rare earth elements comes from China.
All right.
So they're just the biggest. Yeah, but it's like, it's tough to say. Yeah, are they the biggest because of they lack regulation? So they're able
Right.
to give an affordable price. And so US consumers pay for their product rather than paying from, let's say, an Australian mine that might be operating more ethically.
Mm-hmm.
That is That's absolutely happening. Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, we are importing them from China continuously because we're unwilling to pay higher prices.
Which is interesting because it's kind of like it seems to me that the fossil fuel industry has set a standard of unethical behavior in large industries, and we come to expect that, and it's the status quo, and we accept it now. And so you get things like this happening.
I mean, yes. Yeah, that's the could capitalism create any other and, you know,
I mean, it
like
could, but it
but
doesn't.
but it doesn't. I mean, companies really their only goal is to maximize profits, and so
Right.
they're going to do that and by any means necessary. And within China, the bearers of this weight of this environmental catastrophe that's happening with mining rare earth elements is put on the people.
Mhm.
They're just dealing with it. There's just what are called cancer cities. Like it's just the
What?
water and the soil is just poisoned. If you stand, I mean, a lot of the information is being limited, of course,
Yeah.
right? That like if you stand up against these mines or these mines just kind of come into villages, take over. If you are a villager and you protest, you are beaten, arrested, silenced in any way. Um, you really can't stand up against them because you'll be arrested. You really can't say no.
Right.
And yeah, there's really only 6 big companies that are controlling most of the mines in China, and it's just it's problematic. It's really problematic because that really puts a strain on the U.S. relationships with China, right? Like,
Mhm.
yeah, there was a quote actually of a Chinese the Chinese government funded a report from this man named Gao Fengping, um, and he said China will not rule out using rare earth exports as leverage to deal with the trade war in the
A
U.S.
fucking course not.
Right,
And why would they?
right. They have right. So this will be a really big shift
Right.
in China's power in the world. I mean,
Right.
it's
We
already
need to
been.
find better solutions, different than yeah.
Yeah, right. So right, like if we need to continue to increase how we're building renewable like pieces of like what would be the term like of like a piece of a windmill? I don't know.
A
I'm like
component.
a component.
Eh,
Okay, a component of these machines for
Right.
extracting renewable resources. Yeah, we definitely have to think of an alternative or like
Right.
yeah, some different yeah, it needs to be better funded to figure out ways
Mhm.
to
Improve.
extract it
Yeah.
safely, maybe different elements. Um, Ooh, here's a fun fact.
Yeah.
Okay. So guess how many rare earth mines there are in the US?
0.
Technically, yeah, you win. Yeah, there was one. There was one, but it went out of business in 2016. Yeah,
Why?
money. It wasn't profitable. Um, yeah, it was one. It was in San Bernardino in California, so Southern California. I mean, the US has way more regulations in terms of how workers need to be
Yeah.
treated, in terms of environmental emissions, in terms of like workplace safety, like all
Mhm.
of this stuff that China doesn't have or is actively kind of just not
Is
regulating.
ignoring. Yeah.
Yeah, it's ignoring. So that's why.
I see.
So yeah, this is a big issue that these energy companies in the US like need to be on the cutting edge of and need to have the ability to secure funding that allows for them to find alternatives for that. Because like
Mhm.
this I mean, how can you not foresee this becoming the same
It's the exact same issue.
as fossil fuels, right? So that was a trip. But um yeah, that's a little bit about that. Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, and
This is like
right.
seems like it puts us in such a shitty pickle because
Yeah.
like now you have extraction causing climate change and extraction as a solution to climate change
Causing environmental issues
causing
separately
other
and,
environmental
and
issues.
humanitarian issues. Yeah.
Right. I
Yeah.
mean, okay.
What's the lesser of two evils? Right. Yeah. And you know what's interesting? I didn't like then separately when looking into, what people are talking about with climate change and like what are the actual recommendations? What are people actually
Mhm.
suggesting we do? I don't see that mentioned anywhere really of like we need to find alternatives to these rare earth elements that are finite also
Right.
like fossil
Right.
fuels. Like what then if we extracted like I think there was an interesting fact and that I didn't take note of, but it was something like if we transitioned now to fully renewable, we would use up all of our resources of the finite elements within like a human lifetime. So it's not like there's yeah,
So
some
we're in the same place.
kind of. It's
Okay. That's
it's
interesting.
better in terms of carbon emissions, which if that's the biggest crisis, it's just it's maybe solving for one crisis, but creating another.
Causing another, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Okay. So is the climate crisis carbon related?
yes.
Because the book made it seem like it's not. So I was like, let's.
It mhm. Yeah, I mean, yes, the climate change consensus points that the world agrees upon now are that Earth climate has warmed significantly since the late 1800s.
Mhm.
Human activities, primarily greenhouse gases, are the primary cause. Continuing these emissions will increase the likelihood of and the severity of global effects, and that people and nations can act individually and collectively to slow the pace of global warming while also preparing for unavoidable climate change and its consequences.
So basically, the consensus is like, this shit is coming. It's our fault. We need to prepare for it and transition away from
Yeah.
making it worse.
Yeah. So it's like, can we stop making it worse? But also, shit's about to go down.
Mhm. Mhm.
And
Mhm.
if we don't stop making it worse, is about to go roll down.
Yeah.
I don't
Okay.
have the proper terminology.
No, that is the proper terminology.
Yeah,
That
it's about to get freaking real and really shitty. And yeah, so there's something like, I don't know, 47 years or something that we have left of carbon emissions at the current rate before the global temperatures rise another 1.5 degrees Celsius.
okay.
There's a climate clock in New York City, though, that says something like 7 years or so, and that is counting down the timeline that we have that we need to reduce emissions by that time, and that will give Earth a 67% chance of staying under that 1.5 degrees Celsius warming.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But does it take into consideration, and this is kind of like part of what I looked into, is like, does that take into consideration the growth of the amount of fossil fuels that we actually use? Because everything I read also says, like, if we keep going at the level we're going right now, but we're not at a solid level,
I
right?
know,
We
it's increasing.
increase our use of fossil fuels every year.
I think that's I didn't find that anywhere. It did definitely seem like it was all based off of current emissions, that it
Right.
wasn't necessarily incrementally increasing
Right.
the way that our actual usage is, which I think is bad science. I think that there's an error there.
Yeah.
If unless it's just unclear in terms of how they're getting these.
I couldn't find a clear definition of that either.
Yeah.
So yeah, because they were like, if you go, because a lot of times you'll see things like, we need to go back to under 1995 levels of emissions to hit this area, or like percentage, or they use a percentage of coal is down, but it's like, but the raw number is up.
Yeah.
So it's, I don't know, data is always confusing.
Data is confusing, and there's a lot of ways you can skew it. I mean, if I was to give climate scientists the benefit of the doubt, I would imagine that they've calculated some sort of rate of usage and rate of increase of fossil fuel usage, and are
Or an
able
average
to,
rate of increase or something.
yeah, and are able to kind of extrapolate that out. But I
can't imagine, like, we're not scientists, and
Yeah.
that was the first thing that we're like, this is a problem we need to make sure we're fixing. But like,
Yeah. It wasn't
so I'm sure
immediately
that they also do that.
Hopefully. Yeah. So that's what I learned. Frickin' crap. Yeah, it was a rough week. um it is, yeah, it's we've gotten ourselves into quite a pickle.
Yeah. Yeah, we definitely have.
Oh my goodness, my stomach's
Yeah.
growling. I'm hungry.
I'm hungry too. We're
Climate
always hungry.
I'm hungry.
Being human is hard.
Oh boy. Yeah. So what did you learn about? Tell me.
Yes. So I learned about our actual fossil fuel and energy usage, which is why I asked you that question. Like, what are we actually using? What does that look like? Where the fossil fuels are and what we actually have left, because the book made it seem like we have so much time left.
Yeah, you really swept that under the rug.
He went hard on it. I found the 357 number, what he meant by that. But like, that guy, that's all propaganda. Like, guys, I'll get there. And I followed the money a bit. I looked at the subsidies. I looked into how they're funded, but not very much what they're funding, because as you pointed out, the fossil fuel industry funds everything nefarious you can think of.
Yeah, that's
That's
the
the general consensus. I'm sorry for being really anti and negative. I don't want to come off that way, but like that's how it feels. That's how it feels. I also think that that's like what we consistently find. I'm not finding a bunch of positive shit at
they're
all.
not secretly funding like happiness. That's not, no.
No, they're giving happiness because energy is happiness, because everything that good has ever happened to humanity is
Uh-huh.
because of fossil fuels,
Oh, you're
which is
right. Yeah. Oh, wait. No, they are giving us happiness because we can go to jujitsu. Remember?
oh
That
yeah,
was
we can drive to
we can
our
go to
classes we care about.
classes. We can go to have fun time
Yeah,
off.
fun
That's
time off. Yes. Um
uh,
that's that's what they give us. And in return, we accept that they do fucked up shit, apparently. No more.
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What an
Okay.
oddly abusive relationship. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the first few years were great, so I'll just stay. But then it's like it's also like we can't get out. It's like saying to an abused person. Actually, I want to really say thank you to Bailey Sarian because I watch a lot of Bailey Sarian. She's great. Hi. Um she had a whole rant in one of her talks the other day about people in abusive relationships and how when you say, why don't you just leave?
Mm.
It doesn't work that way. And it's not that simple and it doesn't work that way. And it's not just like that for relationships, it is like that for jobs, for homes, for communities, and
Yeah.
for where we get our energy. We are dependent upon fossil fuels and fossil fuel energy. And yes, it is literally like an abusive relationship.
Yeah. Yeah.
It literally is. And they manipulate everything around us very actively. And I had kind of hoped that it like wasn't as severe as it was. And then after doing this research and talking about it for the last month and learning about it and listening to Drilled and listening to The Crisis, like I mean, we talk about this for a few hours a month on our podcast, but we actually spend hours and hours and hours researching and talking about this topic. I truly believe that like the fossil fuel industry is just in everything, making it impossible to leave them.
Yeah.
And then I'm like the CEO of every we need to check on the wives of the CEOs of like every
Oh my
single fossil fuel
goodness.
company. I'm sorry, but like can somebody just like go check on them?
Uh, yeah. What are
Those
their
those
like?
motherfuckers like probably invented gaslighting. Literally invented gaslighting.
Oh my God. The
Like,
internalized misogyny. Oh Lord. Yeah.
wow.
All of it. All of it. Yeah.
Everything. Everything.
Mm. Mhm.
Blah. Sorry.
I agree with you though. Yeah. It is like, right. It's like trying to untangle your highly complex life that's so intertwined with someone else's when you
Yeah.
break up, and it's really shitty, and so it's
Yeah.
really
And
upsetting.
they're evil and they're doing everything possible to make it everything possible to make it impossible for you to walk away.
Yeah, and to make you feel like you're crazy if you doubt them. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm.
It really
Mhm.
is so much freaking corporate gaslighting. Holy moly, I never
That's
really
all it
thought about
is.
that.
It's
Never.
just is. Yeah.
Mhm.
So mad. Okay.
Tell me about
So,
the money. Yeah. Mhm.
well, you want to know about money first?
Versus what? Or what was it?
Actual fossil fuel or energy usage, which is and where and what's left. Those two
Mhm.
are a bit shorter. The money one is going to be kind of
Okay,
like,
yeah.
okay.
How much do we have
So,
left? Yeah.
how much do we have left? Depends completely on the usage, which is why I covered
Mhm.
that too.
Yeah.
And I wrote down a quote from EIA.gov, which is like and a today in energy thing. I also found a World in Data, which will share that link
Mm.
because it has a lot of graphs
Cool.
that shows energy usage. But so this what does EIA stand for? I should know that.
Environmental.
Energy Information.
Oh,
It's the U.S. Energy Information Administration, and it is an independent statistics and analysis company for energy in the United States.
got it. Wow. Okay.
So the share of US total energy consumption that originated from fossil fuels has fallen from its peak of 94% in 1966 to 80% in 2019. So we use a smaller percentage of total energy consumption than we did. So we use other renewables and nuclear energy in a higher percentage than we used to. The
In the
total amount of
U.S.
fossil fuels consumed, what?
In the U.S. Sorry, just
This
be
is in the
specific.
US,
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
So it used to be that 94% of our energy came from fossil fuels. In 2019, it was 80% came
Okay.
from fossil
Good
fuels.
progress. Okay.
Progress.
Or something. Yeah.
The total amount of fossil fuels consumed in the United States has also fallen, which from 86 quads in 2007. Since then, coal consumption has decreased. 11 quads is just a measurement. In 2019, renewable energy consumption in the United States surpassed coal consumption for the first time.
Wow.
Yeah, the decrease in coal consumption, along with a 3 quad decrease in petroleum consumption, more than offset an 8 quad increase in natural gas consumption. So, natural gas is increasing, but coal and petroleum consumption are decreasing a little bit. We are moving in the right direction, which is cool. But between 1966 and in 2019 is a long time.
Did a lot of damage.
Did a lot of damage.
Yeah.
But our the top total amount of fossil fuel consumed, the peak of fossil fuel consumption was 2007. So actually, if you're taking it from 2007 to 2019, we've made a lot of change, a lot of progress in that time. Well, if you remember when I was talking about drilled earlier, and I said that like they took there's 30 years where the fossil fuel industry like knew what was going on, but was actively creating climate denial and an anti-policy. That got really broken open like in the past 10 or 15 years. And a lot in 2015 when the Paris Agreement happened.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I was thinking, 2007 just seems kind of early. Like, I don't remember, but I guess that's really when a lot of like this new age of environmentalism kind of started again. There was a wave of that. Yeah.
Yeah. Like
Greenpeace and like.
Right. Well, I mean, it makes sense that it took 10 years for it to reach international status, right? Like Renewables is really a grassroots campaign. So it makes sense that it took that long. It also makes sense that it took such a short period of time when you think about that whole timeline, that the fossil fuel industry learned about climate change and accepted it in the 1970s, 60s and 70s, and then realized in the late 80s that it was going to fuck them over and started on this climate denial path. And then it took until 2007 for people to catch back up and be like, wait a second, that's not right. And now we have this like split between the climate denier community and the environmental community. I don't even think they're environmental community. I won't even want to call them
humans.
Regular humans. I don't know. We're all regular humans. I don't know. Some people that just believe the propaganda. It's not your fault if you believe propaganda.
It's really not. Yeah.
So, yeah, that whole thing happened, but we're moving in the right direction, and that's good.
It's great.
I also read a PDF, which is very long. I looked through it, and it's a transition plan from a company called IRENA, and it's a transition to renewables and what needs to happen and what is proposed. I don't recommend it. It's really dry and it was very hard to read. But what they said was the total renewable energy has to rise from around 15%, which was just 2015 number, but from about 15% to around 66% by 2050 to hit the goals that we want. So that
Okay.
was a really nice number. And that was again at like the current rates. So,
Hmm.
but current rates change if renewables change
I know.
things, you know, like rates are weird. So, yeah.
Rates are weird. And so 2050 though, that's 30 years away. Like according to the climate change, like the drastic effects are going to happen within 40 years.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know.
Like,
Like,
yeah, but we can't really rush progress at the same time. Like, we'll get there when we get there and we
yeah.
have to deal with it otherwise. Like, at least we're trying now. You know, I don't know a better way to like really think about it. I mean,
Yeah.
it's
I mean,
hard.
it's hard to get old systems to change. Yeah. So I
Yeah.
think that's like 2050 is like that's a, but it seems so far away. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's in our lifetime. It's
Mhm.
still in our lifetime.
I hope so.
And
Yeah.
then like we kept see we kept hearing him in Epstein in the book say that like we had all these years left.
Yes. He was like, we haven't even like scratched the surface
We
of the
haven't even
amount of
scratched
oil
the
we have.
surface, the amount of oil. Well, he was saying fossil fuels, but actually I think what he meant there was coal. Um,
Okay. Mm-hmm.
because I actually looked into this a lot because there's differing opinions. And what I found to be most interesting was that the where opinions differ is based almost entirely on technology, and the technology that we use most often is hydraulic fracking.
Cracking. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Mm-hmm.
and the depth of which we get things. And I kept seeing this term unconventional oil and gas development, like unconventional oil, and I kept seeing
Hmm.
that everywhere. Um,
Interesting.
and essentially, it's the industry term for like shit we have to figure out how to get out of the earth and process.
Oh.
So
Okay.
so he's not wrong. Epstein wasn't wrong when he said that we had like all this oil and all this coal. But actually, he also was wrong because we can't get to it, and we don't have the technology to get to it, and it's not as good. It's like it's not. Let's see. I have a quote in here.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
I don't know where it is. It's somewhere, but it's essentially where they said that we assume that just because we can get it out of the ground that it's as effective as the oil that's like hanging around, that like it's actually not super possible for us to run out of reserves because it is just squished fossil, it's just squished biomass really.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's yeah, it's there, but it's not as it's not as pure oil or energy, so it needs like more and more refinement to get to a place that is as useful as what we have now.
I
And
see.
and what we're using now is not nearly as useful as what we had in the beginning. So we are currently at a place where we have to go deeper and deeper and deeper to get it. And like, I don't know if you remember, Epstein was talking about scraping the bottom of the
Yeah.
barrel being
The
an oil term. So it's an oil term for like the clumpy shit that's at the bottom of the barrel that they have to like refine. And he was like, it seems like it, you know, it's just used differently for petroleum stuff. Yeah, that's where we're getting though, is like to oil and to products that just aren't as effective straight from the ground.
right. So they're not only more difficult to extract from the earth, but they're of decreasing quality as well.
Yes.
Yikes.
Yeah, they are. Um, which is
He completely didn't even acknowledge that. Like he was just like,
he
"Oh, we
he
have so
acknowledged it.
much." He's
He
operating on
like
the assumption that we'll just
yeah,
get it.
Yeah, he acknowledged it in a way that was like, yeah, but we just need the money to develop the tech to make it better. Yeah. Um,
Okay, like the biggest gloss over of all the time.
yes. Super. And the thing that like got me, because I'm gonna just like take a step back towards what you were talking about with like the atrocities,
Mhm.
is because this ties well into it in the States, because we don't see it very often in the United States. But I read an article from Yale. It was Yale's environmental team.
Cool.
And it was actually like not pro or anti fracking, but it just told a story, just told the story of what actually happened. Because there was a situation in Pennsylvania where people were like able to like light their water on fire, which Epstein also just like talked about, but he like Epstein also got in front of, saying that like there's no proof that wasn't happening before. Motherfucker, people don't drink water if it smells like chemicals and you can light it on fire. Yeah, it happened before. What so okay. Sorry, it makes me really mad. What they actually do, fracking is like they take salt water and with minerals in it, and they pump it really fast into a vertical well that will connect to a horizontal well so that they can get the oil from the horizontal well. That's essentially fracking.
Mhm.
And then the water bubbles back up at first and it brings oil with it. They basically use water to like shoot it to like
Mhm.
create a hole so that the oil can bubble up.
Is it oil or is it natural gas?
No, get oil and gas
Okay, maybe
is what I have listed. So
there's
probably
byproducts of yeah. Okay.
they're both. Um, It's usually used for gas, you're right. So it's like,
In there, bubbling. Okay.
yeah, it's like a geyser. They like
Yeah.
basically create a geyser.
Yes.
Then they collect that water and they think they're like, oh, now we're just gonna collect the water back. And what they did was dump it into the stream.
Oh
They do
God.
this all the time. They they discharge it into streams and water, um, that was supposed to be um, processed at the wastewater treatment facility.
Okay. Freshwater systems. They're putting salt water into the freshwater
Salt
system.
water with hella minerals from the middle, from the down
Yeah.
really far, like 3,000 feet down into the ground. Yes. Yeah. So they just dump that wastewater. First they pull it from the wait. First they pull it from the stream, and then they push it deeper into the earth, and then they put it back into the stream. This is what they were doing.
Mm-hmm.
And then they were like, to get gas out, right? Like, you think that some gas isn't going to get into that water, or like the molecules there? You're wrong. You wrong. So, so it contaminated the groundwater. It
Yeah.
contaminated the water supply. Now they put policies in place because of it. Now, this happened in Pennsylvania. They sued and they didn't win the suit because they couldn't prove it. They couldn't prove that the fossil fuel industry was culpable for this issue. Bitches,
Mm-hmm.
the system is rigged.
I
This
know.
is true. So now they put policies in place, and this happens in the States, but they're not that effective because they have like silos that they put water in
Okay.
when they do the fracking, and like it probably won't fuck up groundwater, but it really consistently does, especially since the they have to take water from somewhere to force it into the ground. So oftentimes they'll take it from a stream, force it into the ground, and then they're holding this water somewhere so that until it like loses its half-life or whatever, and then they dispose of it somewhere that is supposed to have a wastewater treatment facility, but these wastewater treatment facilities in these states aren't set up for this level of contamination, so they miss a bunch of stuff. So that's just a little. That's how, and the relevance of that to this topic is that is how we get our gas now, and that's why Epstein kept saying, like, there's more, we just can't get to it. We need to develop the tech to get to it. This is the tech that he was talking about.
Fracking, yeah.
Fracking.
Differently.
Yeah. Just more ecological disaster. More bullshit. So how much do we actually have left? They think that it would be like 2060 at the level that we currently use. That without going deeper, with development and without like making huge changes to the tech that we have until about 2060.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. The coal production, they change it to, they say sometimes it's like recoverable reserves versus reserves that they currently have, versus they use another word, producing mines, recoverable sources, and demonstrated base. Demonstrated base is that number that we can't get to. Recoverable sources is stuff that we can get to if we tried harder but aren't getting now, and producing mines are what we're getting now.
Okay.
The recoverable coal wood reserves would last about 350 years. So that's where Epstein got that number.
Got it.
But yeah. It's all about funding that new tech, which they spend a lot of money on and they get a lot of subsidies for.
So many, yes. Let's talk
Yes.
about that. Let's talk about the taxes they are not paying.
Let's talk about money. So here's some numbers for you.
Ooh.
I got a lot of information from priceofoil.org, which is true cost is what they call themselves. And a lot of what they're actually the numbers came from is a fact sheet from EESI, the Environmental and Energy Study Institute.
Yeah.
They're great. Yeah, they're awesome. They laid it out for me, and I was like, thank you. So this quote comes from priceofoil.org. Internationally, governments provide at least $775 billion to $1 trillion annually in subsidies, not including other costs of fossil fuels related to climate change, environmental impacts, military conflicts and spending, and health impacts. So, and that's a global estimation, $1 trillion in subsidies annually.
Not including, wait, I don't understand that not including part.
So this website, it actually broke it down really nicely, and they have a really awesome infographic where they talk about where they just put it on there, and maybe we should share that infographic because it's actually bomb.
Sure. Yeah.
So I have it actually. They do a lot of estimation. So they do a lot of estimation into the subsidies that they have, but their goal is true cost. So what is the true cost of fossil fuels? Okay. So they're saying that $1 trillion annually in subsidies but they're not talking about all these other costs:
Got
climate
it.
change, environmental,
Yeah.
military conflicts, and health impacts.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Because those are
Right.
like,
You can't really monetize that.
yeah,
You can't put a monetary value on that stuff. Yes.
yes.
Holy moly. Okay. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yes. In the United States, and they actually talked a lot about hidden costs. The price of oil true cost. They talk a lot about those hidden costs because it's not transparent. So they have to do some like back channel digging to figure out what it was, and that's how they get true cost. What everybody does agree with, because it is above board and like public knowledge, is that conservative estimates put the United States direct subsidies at roughly 20 billion per year. Yes. And the European Union subsidies are around 55 billion euros, which was really surprising to me, actually. So I'm just looking,
Big.
including negative externalities. The International Monetary Fund, which does include those other things,
Okay.
put the global GDP for fossil fuel subsidies at 6.5%. That's 6.5% of the global GDP, which is
Mm-hmm.
$5.2 trillion, goes to the fossil fuel industry.
Mm-hmm.
$5.2 trillion in
Mm-hmm.
2017. Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so they get direct subsidies, which is like intangible drilling costs and percentage depletion. You made a note about this before,
Yeah.
where it's like there's less of it. So, depletion allows firms to deduct a set percentage from their taxable income because there's less oil and gas and coal in the ground.
Right. They get a they get a tax break because they're reducing the amount of a particular substance that
Mhm,
selling of the substance is the
mhm,
entirety of their
mhm.
business model. Wouldn't any selling of anything reduce the quantity? Like you still then you have to make more. I'm like,
Yeah,
what?
yeah, that one. That one. And then there's the clean coal investment, which is a direct subsidy.
That was a lot of marketing. Clean coal, yeah.
Yeah, and when I was 18 years old, I fell for it.
I believed it too. Yeah.
Um,
I thought they could do better and they were actually gonna maybe do
I
something.
believed that they might be trying to do a better job, but actually they just did it for taxes. Um,
Oh,
yeah,
cool.
because it's a like gasification is the word they kept using, and it's based on carbon sequestration.
Yeah.
So it's not about using less coal, but it is about turning the carbon emissions into gas and then sequestering them somewhere, which I guess is like better than not, but they get a subsidy for that.
Hmm.
Yields.
Mm.
Then they get a ton of indirect subsidies. Like the direct subsidies are like, okay, you're a fossil fuel industry, you get these because you do fossil fuels.
Yeah.
Indirect subsidies are like, you get these because you know how to figure out tax loops.
Yeah.
Literally.
Okay. Yeah. They probably have
The
whole teams of people working on these tax loops.
Yeah, definitely. And I would like their help.
Oh God.
Can you imagine having a financial advisor that also works for the fossil fuel industry, and like how many tax breaks we could figure out how to have?
I don't mind paying taxes.
I also don't mind paying taxes, but I want to make sure that like I know what the fuck I'm doing.
That
Anyway,
okay.
yeah,
There's a middle ground.
yeah. So this is this is annoying. For last in, first out. This allows the most expensive reserves to be sold first, because it reduces the value of their entire inventory. And there's not like a number of calculation to put on that because that's crazy to think about. So like I don't know how to explain this. I have a cup and it has this much liquid in it right now, and
Mhm.
this is how much I pay taxes on today. If I fill it up, I should be paying taxes on the whole thing. But if I fill it up and then this part is like the delicious,
So
yummy hot water flavor and I drink it away, the rest of my inventory is less yummy. So I have to pay less taxes on it. That's essentially how the last in, first out accounting works.
huh.
Yep.
Interesting. Okay.
I don't, yeah. And that one is very, very complicated.
Yeah, that's I don't quite understand that one, but
No, it's really complicated.
it just seems
But
like a way where they're just sort of like saying they used more from a more expensive reserve so that they can
mm,
show that
sort
they're
of.
they're holding less in inventory.
No, they're not. They're saying that it's last in, first out. So it's almost literal because it's a physical thing. So like the last thing you pump into a reserve is the most viable because it is the newest. Let's put it
Okay.
that.
Fresh
It's
oil. Okay.
fresh oil.
Mhm.
It's the best, most expensive reserve that they have.
Okay.
So this subsidy is for people, it's for owners that like use that oil first, sell that
Okay.
oil first,
Okay.
so that their old supply, which they haven't moved, their old reserves get taxed at a lower rate because they are less viable or something. It doesn't actually make that much sense because oil's
Curious.
fucking oil, guys, but like that's that's the subsidy for that. Makes no sense.
Mhm.
Then they have foreign tax credit, which gives them fully deductible foreign income tax. I actually have this same tax credit as an immigrant here.
Mhm.
Like that is so that I don't have to pay American taxes and Dutch taxes.
Right.
I'm only taxed once. So like this this is a foreign tax credit for American businesses operating outside of the country,
Yeah.
which is different than a human. But like not in the law, corporations are taxed as humans.
Right.
So
That was the biggest fuck up of like our within our lifetime, that changing.
s- so stupid. That happened. That wasn't even really a changing. It just the Hobby Lobby case kind of like made us aware of it again, but like it actually, I just learned this from Drilled. It actually started in like the 1800s, the
Really?
late 1800s. Yeah, the Supreme Court started talking about corporations as like human entities then. So it's not new. It's just like new. It's just newly precedented.
Hmm. Really? Okay. Interesting. I thought it was somehow related to Citizens United, which happened like
Right.
10
It's
years later.
not.
Okay.
It was already a precedent on the books, but Citizens
Hmm.
United and the Hobby Lobby case made the precedent more effective, like made it
Huh.
more up, I guess,
It
in our
like solidified it further
yeah,
in
yeah, yeah.
yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So they get the foreign tax credit,
Yeah.
which would generate $12.7 billion in just in tax revenue if they closed that. Master limited partnerships, which is a structure, which is how a business is structured. The most fossil fuel companies are structured this way, which essentially means that they're not taxed as publicly traded corporations are taxed. They have the tax benefits of partnerships, which we have a partnership. And that essentially means that, like, as shareholders, we have to pay personal income tax, but we're exempt from corporate income taxes. To think like that's very, very helpful for us
Yeah.
as small business owners, but to
Right.
think of the fossil fuel industry not having to, like, also being on that same level is
Why?
just so
Why?
disgusting. So gross. Renewable
Record
energy companies,
profits. Mhm.
yeah, yeah. And renewable energy companies don't have that.
You don't get any of this.
Don't get any of that. Yep. They also get subsidies for research and development.
Yep.
A lot of times, what I read is that they'll kind of start a R&D project that they just won't actually, like, work on or do for, like, carbon sequestration, power plant efficiency, water management. They'll, like, start working on those things, and then they'll just kind of let them fizzle and keep getting research and development subsidies and, like, being like, well, we didn't have enough this year, so that's kind of a bullshit thing that's happening. They just kind of, like, pretend to do it.
Yeah.
What they do focus on is carbon sequestration quite a bit so that they can make those pretty propaganda things that you see on their websites.
Yeah.
They also get a lot of subsidies. Let's see, where did I found that information? Okay.
Actually go to the, like, Exxon website right now. Just curious.
Oh my God, it's gonna, So here's your thing about creating instability. I wrote it down. I took notes on your times. You said about in the beginning that they create instability because they make money from instability.
Yeah.
That's true in a lot of different ways because they also make a lot more money and get a lot more subsidies and grants and funding when they are operating in countries that are considered developing countries. So when a country is seen as too poor to fund their own energy consumption or like that they don't have the infrastructure or the right type of infrastructure or they're really unstable, fossil fuel industry gets grants and stuff to be able to operate in those countries. And
Wow.
and those grants are way, way higher than they get operating in any other developed country at all.
I see.
Like,
So they have a financial incentive to create instability, like, legitimately.
right.
Yeah. Wow.
Exactly. They, like, it says that they get a tax break, and this is in that estimations from price of oil. They get about 45 billion in consumption in developed countries and $630 billion for consumption in developing countries. So they get a lot, and plus a lot more for production in developing countries and a lot more for export credits.
It's so fucked up.
And
It's just so crazy because, like on a basic level, like, like, part of that is good. Like, yeah, if you're going into a developing country and establishing jobs and, like, producing something that has a lot of value, then awesome. But that's not what's actually happening, though.
not what's happening in practice, but they're
Yeah.
getting, like, international finance and development. Like, this is, like, most of that $1 trillion that's spent annually in these subsidies are for things like securing fossil fuels production and consumption in developed industries, international finance, export of a credit or like now we are setting up an export from Myanmar,
Mhm.
like they get a subsidy for that. They get a tax break for that.
Mhm.
In addition to funding for it.
Wow.
So, yeah. Um there's so much more and I can't. It's never ending. The money situation when it comes to the fossil fuel industry is never ending. We're talking about trillions of dollars. $1 trillion a year. And we're arguing over like $1,200 for people that don't make enough money to like survive without going to work every day.
What do you mean?
We're arguing over like
Stimulus
student
checks?
loan
Yeah.
debt or
But
like
several billion dollars, but still, yeah, it's
several billion dollars, but it wasn't like $100 billion just because I put a port over here. Like,
right. Yeah, we throw around
and
money so nonchalantly within corporate America, yet are so fiscally conservative when it comes to actually helping people. It is
yeah,
the
like
epitome of
2 billion, like a few $1 billion is like a drop in the bucket
yeah,
per year for even just the direct subsidy.
so freaking crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, that
Yeah, it's just
it's never ending.
hmm.
So
No,
that's
yeah, really,
why,
yeah. I mean, the same, right? Yeah, the money shit and the just all of the human rights issues and
yeah.
yeah, environmental issues. It is kind of a never-ending list. Um,
Mhm. Mhm.
hmm. Yeah,
Corruption. This is a really long episode.
I don't even know how long it was. Yeah,
Uh, it's been I've been
I don't
trying
know
to
or
write the
so.
start time and the end time
Okay,
because if I could write a message to Zoom and say how they could fix it is like give us a time limit of
please yeah,
like
please
the
tell the
recording.
time right there. Yeah, that would
Yeah.
be so cool if it just had a counter. Um, yeah,
Yeah.
this is a big issue. And yeah, I mean, we
Yeah.
needed to kind of cover these bits because it is important background information when it would be naive of us to just be like, yeah, invest in away from fossil fuels and into renewables,
Right.
which isn't not our thought,
Right.
after doing all this research, but it's like, okay, we have to be really thoughtful in how we're doing this and how we're making
Right.
these steps forward and that it is actual progress and we're not just getting ourselves into the same predicament that we're currently facing.
Yeah. Exactly. We need to know what we're talking about. This environmental is about investigating this stuff. It's not about like, oh, cool, we should just like love the planet because we
Right.
do love the planet every single day. But this is about like understanding what's actually going on and how to make it better and how to help make choices and how to help brands make better choices. So I have a lot of respect, and I always have, but I definitely do now. I have a lot of respect for brands that are heavily focused on having their products developed using wind and solar energy.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's hard. It's like you
It's an investment.
it's
Yeah.
yeah, it's just that's a difficult line to walk because fossil fuels are rampant and everywhere. They're also in like the fossil fuel industry and the fossil fuel research is also very much in renewables. Like the industry is also the fossil fuel industry also puts money towards the
Hmm.
renewable
Oh
industry.
yeah, of course, because it is there's money to be made.
They
They're
yeah,
not going to leave
also they
that on the
literally have to.
table.
They have to. If they're going to have a foothold as an energy company in 50 years, like there's not going to be more gas. So they like have to also make that transition.
Hmm.
So they have to fund these renewable sources also because if they don't, then they won't have a foothold as deep as a foothold in this transitionary process.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I think that that is a really wild thing that we'll see how that plays out in within our lifetime. Like, as the power shifts away a bit from these oil companies because they're operating with a lot of like flexibility just anywhere in the
Totally.
world, and they're a lot of these like are long standing relationships that was like started in the 1800s and colonialism, and that's why Western countries are still in control of these like oil
Mhm.
reserves that are within Middle East and South America, and
All tied. Some
it's all tied.
evil
But yeah,
genius,
but we
like,
don't have control of China. So as our needs shift to these resources that are primarily there,
mhm. Guys, there's going to be war.
I think it's impending that, yeah, that there's something gonna happen with China within our lifetime because there's a lot of power
Mhm. Mhm.
shift potentially that's gonna happen. Yeah.
Yep. And I
Mm-hmm.
think they've been working on it for a long time.
Yeah.
Like that China, and also Russia. This is just my conspiracy theory that I've had since 2013 when I worked for the rice company and watched global news, and global like hegemony in like agriculture news, is that I think that China and Russia will, if not already have, will start back channeling into the states, cause divide, and potentially create war because
Hmm.
they want more power.
Yeah. Oh,
You can see
I
it
mean, that
in
definitely already happened in
that's
20.
definitely
Yeah.
yes.
It's,
Yeah, but I
yeah.
think that I think that it will become more and more overt. I think that
Yeah.
like I started watching those trend, and I haven't been watching them, but I was watching those trends in 2013 because that was my job, was data
Hmm.
analytics for a global rice company. And that was one of the things I saw. I was like, "Oh, so I'm noticing this happening." Um, and yeah, I think that like especially with this shift in power like you're talking about, we're
Yeah.
we're fully going to see that happen in our lifetimes.
Yes. Yes.
Well, that's a great way to to end our podcast. Is like we're probably going to have a war soon.
Just, prepare yourself. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I think yeah, it's not gonna be tomorrow, but yeah, these are
No.
big issues that affect the entire world, and
Mhm.
that's typically how it plays out is in
Yeah.
some sort of war. So,
Yeah. And we
um,
need to I mean, I don't have yeah. I don't
right.
have I wish there was something positive to like and on the positive note, find a way to solve it. Hey, go
It's almost Earth Day.
yay. Yeah. I
Um,
think I think the
yeah.
positive note is that we have access to be able to learn about this stuff and make educated decisions about it. And yeah, it takes hours of time to do, but like, fuck, what else are you doing? Like,
Hmm.
this is the most important that I think this is one of the most important things that affect all of our lives. And we now have more access than we ever have. And
Yeah.
I think that is the most positive thing and
Hmm.
and the best way for us to start making change.
I agree. Yeah, yeah. The internet is a powerful, very, very powerful tool that we didn't have in previous generations and when other, um, yeah, things were happening in throughout the world. So yeah, it's definitely a very powerful tool of getting information out there. And yeah, there are good people trying to make positive change.
Yes.
We just have to vote them into power and
Yeah.
make sure that they
Vote
can stay there.
vote local, guys.
Vote local.
Vote
Yeah. And
local.
if you're not a terrible person, consider running for local election because the world needs more people that aren't profit driven crazies.
Yeah. I'm
Yeah.
snack driven and it's late and I want to go have some food. So
Yeah, thank
subscribe.
you guys for watching or listening. Goodness gracious. Stick with yeah, next week we'll be back. We'll kind of do a wrap up of everything that we've learned over the course of this whole month and
Yeah. I think that like it'll be a wrap up slash continuing conversation. It's a bit longer. Yeah.
yeah,
We're gonna
there's
keep
certainly enough to talk about. So stay tuned.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks guys and
Have a beautiful day.
try. It'll be great.